So now we are going to take a look at the Angular questions. What is Angular? Angular is a platform for building the client-side applications using the HTML, CSS, and then TypeScript. What is components in the Angular? A component is a building block of UI in Angular that controls a part of the screen. What is a directives in the Angular? A directives is a class that adds the behavior to the element in the Angular application. What is a service in Angular? A service is a reusable class that provides the specific functionality across the component. What is dependency injection? A dependency injection is a design pattern where services are injected into the component or other classes. What is observable in the Angular? An observable is a stream of data that can be subscribed for async operations. What is RxJS in the Angular? RxJS is a library for composing the asynchronous and then event-based programs using the observable. What is Angular module? NG module. NG module is a container for the components, directives, pipes, and then services organized together. What is the purpose of NG zone? NG zone helps in execution code inside or the outside of the Angular zone to manage change direction. What is change direction in Angular? Change direction in the mechanism that Angular uses to update the DOM when the data changes. What is the pipe in Angular? Pipe is a way to transform the data before it displays in the template. What are Angular forms? Angular forms are a module that helps in handling user inputs and then validation. What is the difference between the template driven and then reactive forms? Template driven form rely on the HTML template, while reactive forms are model driven and then more scalable. What is router in the Angular? Router is a module that defines the navigation path and links between the views. What is lazy loading in the Angular? Lazy loading is a technique to load the modules only when needed, improving the performance. What is resolver in the Angular? Yeah, resolver is a class that prefetches the data before navigating to the router. What is ahead of time AOT compilation? AOT compilation is the pre-process process of compiling the Angular templates during build time to improve the runtime performance. What is structural directive? A structural directives changes the structure of the DOM. Example ng if ng4. What is an attribute directive? An attribute directive changes the behavior or appearances of an element. What is Angular CLI? Angular CLI is a command line tool to scaffold and manage the Angular projects. What is the use of ng for directive? ng4 is used to loop through the collections and render the elements dynamically. What is ng if directive used for? ng if conditionally renders the element based on a boolean expression. What is at input in the Angular? At input is a decorator to pass the data from a parent component to a child component. What is at output in Angular? At output is a decorator to emit the events from the child component to the parent component. What is Weave encapsulation in the Angular? Weave encapsulation determines how the styles are applied to a component, emulate, shadow, DOM, none. What is the two-way binding? Two-way data binding is a mechanism where changes in the UI are reflected in the model and vice versa. What is an Angular guard? Angular guard is a service that controls access to the route based on the condition can active and then can deactive. What is Angular Universal? Angular Universal enables server-side rendering for Angular application. What is Ivy in Angular? Ivy is the Angular rendering engine that improves the performance and reduce the bundle size. What are the promises in the Angular? Promises handle the asynchronous operation, resolving or rejecting only one. What are the lifecycle hooks in the Angular? Hooks are a series of methods that Angular calls during the component creation, update, or the destruction. What is ng on init in the Angular? Ng on init is a lifecycle hook called after the Angular has initialized all data bound properties. What is ng on change in Angular? Ng on changes is a lifecycle hook called when a component receives a new data bound input values. What is ng do check in the Angular? Ng do check is a lifecycle hook that detects and act upon the changes not covered by the Angular default. What is ng after view init? Ng after view init is a lifecycle hook called after the component's view has been fully initialized. What is ng on destroy? Ng on destroy is a lifecycle hook called just before a component is destroyed. What is Angular semantic? Semantic is a workflow tool used to automate the Angular development task. What is render to in the Angular? Render to is a service that abstract the DOM manipulation to ensure the capability with the different platform. What do you handle error in the HTTP request in the Angular? By using the catch error operator in the Angular HTTP service. What is ng template in Angular? Ng template is a template used element used to define the reusable sections of the HTML. What is event emitter in the Angular? Event emitter is a class that emits the events to the parent component. What is module Angular? A module organizes an Angular app into the cohesive blocks of the functionality. What is Angular Material? Angular Material is a UI component library that follow Google's materials design guidelines. How do you use HTTP client in the Angular? By importing the HTTP client module and then using the HTTP client service for the HTTP request. What is the difference between the constructor and then ng on init? Constructors initialize the component, ng on init initialize the data after the constructor. What is Angular elements? Angular elements allow the Angular component to be used as a web components. What is the use of async pipe in the Angular? The async pipe unwrap the values from the observable and then promises in the template automatically. What is render factory 2? Render factory 2 is a service to create the render 2 instance for manipulating the DOM. What is the singleton service in the Angular? A singleton service has a single instances shared across the entire application. What is form control in the Angular? Form control tracks the value and status of an individual form input field. What is form group in the Angular? Form group tracks the value and the status of the collection of the form control. How do you set a default route in the Angular? Path equal to and then redirect to and then path match or the in this routing module. What is the Angular interceptor? An Angular interceptor is a service that intercepts the HTTP request and then responses to modify them. What is the providers array in the ng module? It registers the services that can be injected into the component. How do you create a services in the Angular? By using the Angular CLI with the command ng generate service name. What is the what is change direction strategy? It determines when Angular checks for changes in the component. What is view child in the Angular? View child provides a way to access child components or the DOM elements from the parent. What is the view children in the Angular? View children allow the access to the multiple child element or the component from the parent. What is the content child in the Angular? Content child in Angular. Content child across allows across access to the multiple projects element or projected element or the component. What is Angular ahead of time compilation? Ahead of time compilation compiles the Angular templates and then components at build time for better performance. What is pure pipe? Yeah, pipe that transforms the transformation that is memoized and it does not dependent on the external data. What is an impure pipe? Yeah, impure pipe recalculates its value on every change direction cycle. What is ng container in the Angular? Ng container is a logical container element that does not render an actual DOM elements. What is ng content? ng content is used to project content from the parent component into the child component. What is the use of track by in Angular? It optimizes the performance in ng for by tracking the changes to list the items. What is the zone.js in the Angular? Zone.js allows the user to track the asynchronous operation for change direction. How do you handle the 404 Angular error in the Angular? By configuring the wildcard route in the Angular router to redirect to a 404 pages. What is the role of index.html in the Angular? Index.html is a main HTML file that Angular injects the application into. What is can active guard in the Angular? Can active determines whether a root can be activated or not based on a condition. What is can deactivate guard in the Angular? Can deactivate determines if a user can leave a component used to confirm the navigation. What is the ng model in Angular? Ng model is a directive used for two-way binding in template-driven form. What is the control value accessor? Control value accessor is an interface that allow the custom form controls to integrate with Angular forms. What is HTTP interceptors in the Angular? HTTP interceptors outgoing HTTP request and then incoming HTTP responses. How do you handle the reactive form validation using the form builder and then validators in reactive form? What is form builder in the Angular? Form builder is a service that helps building the form group and then form controller in a declarative way. What is router link in the Angular? Router link can directive link routes in the Angular application. What is the router outlet in the Angular? Router outlet is a directive used to insert the routed component view. What is activated route in the Angular? Activated route provides the access to the route specific information, such as parameters. What is router state in the Angular? Router state represents the current state of the router, including the active routes. How do you optimize the Angular app performance? By using the lazy loading, on push changes detection, AOT compilation, and then code splitting. What is ng template outlet? Ng template outlet allow the embedding a template reference dynamically in the view. What is HTTPS in the Angular? HTTP params is used to pass the parameter in the HTTP request. How do you inject services in the component? By adding it into the constructor as a parameter. What is injector in the Angular? Injector as a service that retrieves the instances of the class, typically services. What is at injectable in Angular? At injectable decorator makes mark a class as a variable to be injected as a dependency. What is host listener in the Angular? Host listener is a decorator that listens to DOM events and then triggers event handlers. What is host binding in Angular? Host binding in the DOM property to component their redirectives properly. What is the difference between the browser module and the common module? Browser module is to the root the modules, while common module is used to do the feature modules. What is the difference between the services and then factory? Services are instantiated once per application, whereas the factories created multiple instances. What is test beds in the Angular? Test bed is a primary API to write the unit test for Angular applications. What is protector in the Angular? Protector is an end-to-end testing framework for the Angular applications. How do you handle the event binding in the Angular? Using the event equal to handler function. What is the use of dot for root in the Angular? Dot for root is used to configure the global services and then routes for the root module. What is the use of a for child in the Angular? For child is used to configure the routes in the feature module. How do you create the custom pipes in the Angular? By using the pipe director and then implementing the pipe transformation interface. How do you register a service as a provider in the Angular? By adding it to the provider array in a module or the component. How do you handle the global exception handling in the Angular? By creating a custom error handler class and configuring it in the providers array. What is the use of ng class in the Angular? Ng class dynamically adds or removes the classes based on a expression. What is the use of ng style in the Angular? Ng style dynamically applies into the inline style based on the expression. That's all.